Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this Churchill Fellowship session. We're talking about accessibility as the theme today. My name is Adam Davey. I'm CEO of the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust, and we're based here in Canberra, Ngunnawal country. I'm going to begin this information session with an overview of what Churchill Fellowships are all about, how they work, how you apply, the sorts of things that we're looking for. First, I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nations people, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to welcome any Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people who have tuned into this session. We did have a session last week that our newly formed Indigenous Churchill Fellows Network ran, and they want me to pass on that they're very keen to provide any advice or tips for other First Nations applicants. So get in touch with us at the Trust if you're interested in that. Bit of housekeeping. So you'll notice that you can't use the chat function, but you can use the Q&A function. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function to ask those questions as you think of them. If you miss your chance or you think of questions after the session is finished, you can get in touch with us at the Trust via our website, or you can call us. We're a small office, and there's always usually someone here during business hours to answer your questions. We'll deal with all the questions at the end, so that'll allow us to work through all of those questions thoughtfully and in a considered way. We have two Churchill Fellows with us presenting tonight. We've got Michael Small from Tasmania and Helen Smith, who is in Canberra. She was awarded in New South Wales. And I'll introduce those two speakers after I've done my piece. I also wanted to acknowledge that, it's been very difficult times we're living through over the last couple of years with COVID and the disruption, both here in Australia and internationally. Lots of uncertainty. I'm pleased to say that we've got Churchill Fellows travelling again. We've had Fellows return already this year from their Churchill Fellowship travel, so we're getting a little bit back to normal. And of course, if you're successful this year, if you apply, your travel will start next year, so plenty of time to get organised and hopefully for things to continue to return a little bit more to normal. So I'm just going to share my screen now and start my presentation proper. So a little bit about the Trust and Churchill Fellowships. Often I get asked, where does the money come from to pay for Churchill Fellowships? And I think that's a really good question, and it's worth understanding a little bit of the history. So when Sir Winston Churchill resigned as British Prime Minister in 1955 at 80 years of age, he'd served under 5 reigning monarchs, survived 3 wars. He'd been a writer, a painter, an artist, an historian, adventurer. He'd won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1953. There was a widespread desire to honour Sir Winston Churchill and to capture the essence of his public service, his intellect and even his humour for future generations. Now, he wasn't perfect, and we acknowledge that, and we've got some really insightful essays we've commissioned, which you can read on our website, that look at Sir Winston Churchill's legacy through a contemporary lens. But there was no doubt that Sir Winston Churchill was someone who believed that anything was possible if you put your mind to it, and that the greatest figures in history were those who made a contribution to public service and to their fellow countrymen. When Prime Minister Sir Robert Menzies announced the news of Sir Winston's death in January 1965, he also announced a public fundraising appeal. And it's that public fundraising appeal that involved over 220,000 Australians door knocking, supported by the RSL, that raised the funds for the Churchill Trust. So that Australians' generosity, and as well as business generosity and governments of the day, the combined funding raised was about £2.2 million, or around $4 million, back in 1965. So those funds have been carefully invested and managed, and we have also, of course, received bequests and donations and sponsorships that allow us to award, over 100 Churchill Fellowships on a typical year. So I think it's a pretty amazing story, and that's where the funding comes from. The average value of a Churchill Fellowship is around $28,000. So the other question I tend to get asked is, what are the attributes of a Churchill Fellow? What sort of person are you looking for? And you can read the slide there, and I would say that, Churchill Fellows are the types of people who are not just passionate about an issue, but they're committed to an issue. So they might work in that space, but if they change jobs, they would still be passionate and committed to that particular issue. The sorts of people who want to learn and share that knowledge with others so that the community might benefit. Now, Churchill Fellowship is a unique and prestigious opportunity that's open to Australians from all walks of life. Importantly, it's not an academic scholarship. It's quite different. You don't have to have any specific educational achievements or attainment to apply for a Churchill Fellowship. So you don't have to have finished year 10, for example. We don't mind. And also, it's not a funding grant. It's much more empowering than a funding grant. We don't ask you to quit and pay back, every cent of the fellowship. You design the project and you have a lot of autonomy over how you do that. A fellowship's not just an overseas trip. It's the start of a lifelong journey and your contribution to make Australia better. So there are expectations that come with the Churchill Fellowship that you continue to pursue improvements and change in the area of your Churchill Fellowship project. A fellowship must be taken between 4 and 8 weeks in typically one continuous journey. There are some new changes which I'll refer to in a moment. We've awarded close to 4,500 Churchill Fellowships since the Trust was established in 1965. And Churchill Fellows do travel across the globe on the widest and broadest range and depth of topics, and bring back to this country, informations, networks, projects, products, ideas, and innovations that all help make this country stronger. So you do need to be an Australian citizen or, as of this year, a permanent resident of Australia and over 18 years of age to apply. There's no upper age limit. We have awarded at Churchill Fellowship, I think perhaps 70 years of age may be the oldest we've awarded, but we don't have any set limits there. The ability to travel overseas is essential. And 2 things I want to say there. Firstly, we have had some questions, do I need to be vaccinated against COVID? Well, we don't have a requirement for that, but you do need to be willing to comply with whatever government regulations are in place in Australia and in other countries in order to be able to travel. So if that includes being vaccinated against COVID, you'll need to be able to do that. It might include obviously having a passport and visas and a whole bunch of other things. So you do need to be willing to travel overseas. If you have a disability and you need support, it could be a carer or other things to accompany you, we can usually accommodate those requests and support you in that way. We also offer virtual research options. So again, it might be for reason of disability, or perhaps you have caring responsibilities and you just can't go overseas for 4 to 8 weeks. We are allowing, as of this year, for you to undertake virtual research as an alternative. It's not the same, obviously, as traveling overseas, but certainly COVID allowed us to trial that, and it's proven to be worthwhile for many projects. Another thing we've added this year that's a bit different is for people living in remote parts of Australia, remote communities. We're offering the option of domestic travel, so travel within Australia, in recognition of some of the challenges some people face in travelling within Australia, let alone overseas due to their own circumstances. A Churchill Fellowship is an individual project, so it's not a team project. So if you're part of a team and your question is, can we apply? No, we can't apply. You can apply for an individual. That said, if you have the ability, your employer, for example, if it's related to your work, can pay for someone to accompany you, that can be done. So we've seen that happen before, but only one person can do the Churchill Fellowship. If you're undertaking tertiary studies, that's okay. However, your proposed project can't actually form part of those tertiary studies. And the reason for that is you're expected to commit 100% to your Churchill Fellowship. So it's not sort of an adjunct to something you're already doing. The Churchill Fellowship is in itself a big deal, and we need you to commit 100% to it. When you return, you have an obligation to provide some type of report, and that takes time and effort as well. And so think about that. If you are studying, you'll need to commit that time next year to your fellowship. So I really think it's important that you hear that a Churchill Fellowship is an opportunity for people from all walks of life. And that's something that's a mantra for us. It's not just a saying. We really do want these to be available to a diverse range of people from across Australia. Your project must be suitable for a fellowship. And by that, what I mean is there needs to be some evident benefit to Australia, to the community in some way, by you undertaking your project and returning and sharing that knowledge or those ideas or those best practices or those skills in the community. So you do need to demonstrate, and it is a competitive process, keep this in mind, you need to demonstrate that you fully explored your topic within Australia to be considered. So, by that, what I mean is we don't want to spend, around $28,000 sending you around the world to learn something you could have already learnt in Australia. So you need to be aware of what is happening in Australia and quite focus on what you can learn from overseas. The project must be a self-contained project. So I mentioned it can't form part of a university qualification. It also can't be funded partly by another organisation. So we're not, an opportunity to tap into an external travel budget for your organisation if you're thinking about applying from that perspective. The Churchill Fellowship is a standalone project. So sort of related to that, your Churchill Fellowship project doesn't have to relate to your day-to-day employment. It can, and it often does, because people tend to gravitate and get really, interested and passionate about things they're working on, because let's face it, we spend a lot of time at work. But it might not. It might have nothing to do directly with your employment, and that's perfectly fine. So we don't set limits on the topics or the issues for the Churchill Fellowships. There is no set topic. The beauty is you design the project yourself. So if you can think of a suitable topic, or you're interested in a suitable topic, and you can demonstrate that benefit to the Australian community through you furthering your knowledge and skills in that area, then there really are no limits. We do offer some sponsored fellowships. So this will be from individuals or organisations, or in some cases bequests left to the Trust, where we do offer fellowships on specific topics or to specific types of people, geographically, etc. I think relevant to the theme of this session of accessibility, Rodney Warmington was a Churchill Fellow, and he left a bequest. So we now award the Rodney Warmington Churchill Fellowship, and the focus of that is on issues relating to disability and accessibility. We have an A.V. Jennings Fellowship looking at architecture, and that might be something that's related to accessibility. You'll hear from Michael maybe a bit more about that today. We also have an Auto Skills Churchill Fellowship, which is designed to improve or benefit Australia's automotive sector. And again, there might be an accessibility angle for that. Well, some of you tuning in today might not even have anything to do with accessibility on your topic, which is fine. What I would mention with the sponsored fellowships is don't spend too much time worrying about it. When you start your application, and I encourage you to go in, if you haven't already, and start your application so you can see the questions and get a feel for it. You'll have drop-down boxes to choose 1 or 2 sponsored fellowships to be considered for. It doesn't matter if you don't choose any, and it doesn't matter if you choose the wrong ones, because we'll look at the applications and assess them all equally anyway, and then we'll decide if there's a good fit for a sponsored fellowship and allocate that. So you apply online. Still a month to go. So that's the good news. Applications don't close until the 28th of April. 5 p.m. Important to remember that time, because what we find is invariably everyone waits to the last minute to put the application in. I would recommend not doing that if you can. You have to make your application using our online system. Please talk to us if that's a barrier for you. So I don't want anyone turned away because they can't fill out a form. That doesn't make sense to me. So we have had an example where we've had an application submitted already from somebody who suffers from dyslexia, and he asked for a scribe to help him fill out his application. So that was one way around that issue. There might be other ways we can assist you as well. So please don't be shy if that's a problem for you using the form. But remember, you're competing against all other applicants. And so you need to think about how are you going to convince the selection committee or the selectors to invest in you and in your project idea. You're going to need 2 references. So one reference who can talk about or vouch for you and your personal characteristics. You know, you're the type of person that gets things done, you're motivated, etc., etc. And someone who can talk with some credibility or authority about the topic of your Churchill Fellowship. So someone that's knowledgeable in that field and say, yes, this particular project is going to address an issue that I can speak with credibility on. You know, it needs to be addressed. So what you need to do with your 2 referees is think quickly about who they're going to be and get in touch with them and make sure that they'll be available over the next few weeks to fill out their reference. That whole online application form will automatically, you know, once you put in their details, send an email to those referees and they can complete their reference online, and it'll populate into your application form. You can't submit your application without 2 referees selected. You might go out to more than 2 referees, in which case you get to choose which 2 you want to include. I wouldn't suggest going out to too many. Really, you only need the 2. Contact them, make sure they're available, and that they can put the time aside to do it for you before the closing date. Don't leave it to the last minute. It's not going to be your best application if you wait until the last day or so. It's easy and it's free to go in and start your application. Churchill Fellows tell us that it's a really great way to refine your thinking by even just filling out the basic details and starting to drop some thoughts into the questions in the form. You can save it at any time and come back at any time, as many times as you want before the closing date. So lots of opportunities to work on your draft. Now, as part of the application form, we do ask for an itinerary, and this is the exciting bit where you kind of design, you know, your own project. Which countries do you want to go to? Which cities do you want to visit? Which people or organisations do you want to meet with? And what are you going to do there? Is it a course? Is it meetings? Is it, you know, some kind of research? It doesn't have to be structured research. It could be observation. So you need to sort of map that out and how long you're going to be into half week to week blocks. What we do expect you to do is have a really good understanding of where you want to go and why. What we don't expect you to do is to have those meetings locked in. So we're not expecting you to have contacted the people and said, oh, I might get this thing, you know, will you meet with me? It's a bit premature to do that now. It's a good idea to know that the organisations or the people you want to meet with are open to meeting with people in the first place, but you don't need to contact them. So don't stress about having to have it locked in, but it does demonstrate, you know, that you know where you want to go and why. Now, we use that itinerary that you apply for, if we award you a fellowship, to project the budget, you know, to cost your fellowship. So once you've got it, you can't make big changes to your itinerary. There'll be an opportunity to make some small changes, but if you apply for a 4-week Churchill Fellowship to New Zealand, and then after your award you say, actually meant 8 weeks and I want to go to the UK, Canada, the US and France, well, we're not going to be able to make those sorts of changes. So I hope that makes sense to you. What is important as well is don't cram your itinerary full. You know, you don't want to have a 4-week fellowship visiting 16 countries. You'll be run off your feet. What we do want you to do is to factor in some time time for rest, time to enjoy and observe the culture of the country you're visiting, time to take those meetings up that people suggest you have that you didn't know you were going to get until you were there. So time to have a weekend. So the idea is to actually get the most out of the experience, not to get the most number of meetings into the short amount of time as possible. So don't be afraid to factor in some timing. It's going to be a question that'll come up if you get an interview, if you've got too many countries listed and it looks like you'll be run off your feet. So I mentioned we've had Churchill Fellows travelling again, which is fantastic. We've got Churchill Fellows queuing up now. We had our 2019 and 2020 Churchill Fellowship recipients unable to travel now for a couple of years. And so they're all queuing up to leave, which is quite exciting. Selection process. So in each state and territory, we have selection committees, and they'll shortlist applications, and then there'll be interviews for those people who are shortlisted. Applications take into account your referee comments, so they're quite important. The interviews are a good way then to flesh out the applications a bit further and make those final recommendations, which will then go to our board for a decision in mid-September. And that's when you'll finally find out if you're successful. If you're unsuccessful along the way for shortlisting or interview, you'll find out along the way. If you're selected for an interview, we do prefer you to attend in person, but we can accommodate video interviews by exception. And of course, now in the wonderful world of COVID, quite often people might find themselves in isolation. So obviously we need to be able to factor that in to our process. Sort of around half the people interviewed are likely to get offered a fellowship. So making it to an interview is a significant achievement in itself. So the odds aren't bad, they're pretty good, but it is a competitive process, so keep that in mind. We're often asked for tips about the application process and can answer questions at the end of the session. The best tip I can give you is to read and address the selection criteria. Use as little jargon as possible, be clear and succinct. You'll find on our website that there is a timeline that shows you when all the interviews have been set as well. So, if you're feeling confident, have a look at that and make sure you don't plan, holidays or something for the date of your state or territory interviews. So do remember that it's a competitive process. Churchill Fellowships are prestigious. They do open doors to people and organisations overseas. They're well funded and they're highly contested. But that's not a reason to be shy. So I'm not trying to talk you out of it. I think, there's no reason it couldn't be you. And, you should put the application in and have a go. Put effort into your application. That's all I can say. You will be competing against everyone else, and most people do, fill out applications that meet the requirements. But, I think really the message there is just have a crack. Don't be shy. So on this slide, in case you don't already have it, you'll see the office phone number for business hours, and also our website address where you can click that application button and start filling out the application form. So that's enough, I think, about the fellowships from me. I'm now going to introduce to you Helen Smith, who is a Churchill Fellow awarded in New South Wales. She now lives in wonderful Canberra, and Helen was awarded, I think, in 2017, and her fellowship was really focusing on looking at ways for people to be able to access, explore, and enjoy natural places. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Helen to give her presentation.
Great, thanks Adam for that introduction, and just checking that screen share is working okay.
It's beautiful.
Excellent. So my fellowship idea really started at the early stage of 2015 when I was in a hospital bed just following a bushwalking canyoning accident where I took a fall, broke my back and had a spinal cord injury that left me paraplegic. And as I was lying in bed, I began sort of wondering, will I ever be able to go bushwalking again? What is this going to look like? And of course, sort of people pointed me in the direction of various sort of accessible bushwalking websites. And I thought, well, that looks great. I took a look at them and found there was, a dozen or so walks around the sort of Sydney region that were wheelchair accessible. So I had a look at them and realized very quickly that the standard sort of wheelchair accessible bushwalk around 70 meters long along a concrete path to a look at, and would probably take about 5 minutes to complete. And this was really different to sort of my experience of being in natural places in the past, which was much more about experiencing wilderness and being connected for, you know, long periods of time. And that was something that I was really, really craving. But as I got more sort of confident with using my chair and understanding what my life was going to be like, I began to discover that there were an enormous number of fire trails, rail trails, other types of tracks that I could access in my wheelchair. And the key thing that I needed to know was a bit more information. So, you know, what was that track like? What was the gradient? Were there any steps? And if I knew that information, I was able to make a better decision about how I was able to tackle that. Would I be able to do it on my own? Would I take someone with me? What sort of equipment would I need? And this really sparked this idea of information being the real sort of key to improving access to natural places. And this was an idea that I wanted to take to the international community to really find out about how people with disability could explore natural places. It was about thinking about how information rather than infrastructure would be the key to doing that. And it was really about thinking about how to provide people with choice about where they go and spend their time and connect with nature. And look, not only for people with disability that use wheelchairs, but thinking about, you know, parents with prams, thinking about perhaps older relatives who wanted to get outside. These ideas, I went to some of the countries that I felt were most sort of connected to this space. I chose Canada, the US, also parts of Europe, and really planned my trip around ways that I could connect with people working in this space, as well as being able to have a bit of fun myself. So some of the highlights for me were exploring natural places, seeing the redwoods around San Francisco, being able to visit the National Park, look at some great waterfalls, visit the Arboretum in Ann Arbor, as well as going kayaking in Canada, visiting some of the high Alps there as well. So for me, part of exploring these places was not just about going and talking to people, but it was experiencing what accessibility meant for people in these countries, as well as getting to see some pretty fun places as well. I think if I was to pick one highlight, for me, it would be spending time in Finland. I felt really connected to Finland. I loved the quiet forests there. We were able to spend some time overnight out in a log cabin there over a fire, have some hot chocolate and marshmallows, and really be able to take in that environment. I really connected with Finland in a way that I can't really describe. I think it was sort of the people, as well as the just the really sort of peaceful nature of the natural places there. We also had an opportunity to do a bit of, we attracted a bit of attention from local journalists that did a newspaper article, as well as a television slot on some of the work. So that was a really exciting piece for me, and also to be able to sort of promote some of the church in a text. Asked to talk about something that was surprising or unexpected, and I think for me it was realizing what it meant to be a wheelchair user in a country where you have bears. So in America, obviously, as a tourist, I suppose a bit like tourists arriving in Australia, learn about snakes and spiders. For living in America, it's learning about how to deal with bears. And of course, the advice that you're given is to look as big as possible, which is of course quite tricky if you use a wheelchair. You can't just stand up and look as big as possible. And this, of course, took me back to kind of thinking about information, not only being about kind of what a bushwalking track and experience with nature might look like, but it's all the associated information that goes with how to be safe out there. So in an Australian context, that got me thinking about, well, how do we talk about, snake awareness, dealing with sort of spider bites if you do have disability to think about on top of that. My sort of synthesis that I pulled together with my travels was really based around sort of 5 core recommendations. So testing this idea of information over infrastructure was really something that I got a lot of positive feedback from in the international community. And this was a pretty new idea that not a lot of other countries doing in a formal sense, but definitely that was the general vibe of how the accessibility community was moving. It was moving towards providing more choice. So that was really positive for this idea, that it was certainly something that had a lot of merit. Adaptive equipment changing, and it's something that is improving so quickly. I found a lot of support for thinking about sort of community access in Canada. And of course, with adaptive equipment, it's about making sure that you have infrastructure in place allows that equipment to be well maintained if it's being shared at a level. I also learned a bunch of assistive techniques. So you'll see a photo here that's being pulled along with some ropes with some other helpful bushwalkers in a track there. This is what I call Helen's Huskies. So it's a roping up technique that's something that's used by other wheelchairs users around the world, and was something that I sort of brought back and have started kind of implementing here. My 4th recommendation was really connecting with community and really building that sense of inclusion. And of course, with that comes education and advocacy. So really the main sort of outcome for my Churchill Fellowship is moving that conversation of accessibility from just focusing on concrete infrastructure and natural places more towards information. How do we help people access natural places by letting them choose what walks are appropriate for them and providing them with the right information to be able to do it safely. Information on various websites about how to safely approach bushwalking trips as well as overnight trips. And then I've also documented some of the trips that I've done as a way to be able to help people think about their own stuff that they want to do. And of course, this is broader than just wheelchair users. I think there's a lot of overlap here, as I've said, with other community parents that want to take a pram along, as well as people with other mobility restrictions. So the best thing about being a fellow was being able to connect with some really great people. On the left, you've got a photo of a group that I met in Canada and spent the bush with there. They were a group called Accessible Adventures, and were just really great to talk to. So it's a really good example of just one of the many great teams of people that I met when I was traveling. And of course, on the right here, I've got my fellowship cohort when we met up in Sydney to get our initial presentation of our award. And that was, again, just a great way to connect with other like-minded people in the Churchill community. And lastly, I was also asked to talk about, some tips for preparing your application. And I think kind of the key one that I really want to stress is it's okay to be different. The process can be quite intimidating, or it can certainly feel that way. And it's okay to feel like you're and that your idea maybe doesn't fit well with previous projects that have been done. But that's really going to be a way of projects stand out and really allow your passion to come through. Make sure to focus on the outcomes. This is all about going overseas and really bringing back some real world outcomes to change and make Australia a better place for people. So thinking about how they can sort of fit in with your application and how you want that to fit in your project is really important. And lastly, keep it simple. Make sure you practice your so-called elevator pitch. So how can you say it in 30 seconds or less, what the key point of your project is and what you want to achieve. In terms of timing, Adam covered this already, but the main thing is just give yourself enough time to do that planning. Take time to find the best people to talk. It's much better to find, the right person than try to talk to 10 people that are not quite right. And of course, just allow yourself that time to write up your report. Just even in preparing for this talk, I was looking back over my report, and I'm really glad that I spent the time making it a product that I'm really proud of, because I do go back to it it with real fondness. So make sure that you factor that in to your next year as well. And that's my presentation for now. So I'm going to hand back over to Adam unless there's any immediate questions.
Great, thanks, Helen. That's fantastic. So I think I haven't seen any questions come through, and we'll handle them all at the end if any do. So I'll get you to stop sharing your screen, and I'll now ask Michael to join us. And Michael is joining us, I think, from Tasmania, or at least I assume he's still down there. Michael was awarded his fellowship in 2016. Remember that because it was the year that I joined the Churchill Trust. And Michael's project was looking at building accessibility for people with disability, doing some very important work there. And I won't steal his thunder. I'm going to hand over and let Michael tell you all about his fellowship and what he does.
Okay, thanks, Adam. I think I'm connected. You'll tell me if I'm not. I'm joining you from Lutruwita, the Tasmania, the land of the Palawa people, and I acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. Thanks for this opportunity, and thanks, Helen. I'm actually doing some work at the moment on accessible tourism, and I think your message about information and choice is a really poignant part of the advocacy that we're doing in the area of accessible tourism. So thanks for that. My presentation today, this evening, is entitled Inaccessible, Unacceptable. And on my first screen, I've got a picture of one of my favorite stickers that I have been known to put at the entrances to buildings and to facilities from time to time. It's a red image of the international symbol of access with a cross through it and the words inaccessible, unacceptable on it. And that's the title of my presentation. I'm going to be obviously referring to and describing the images for any of the participants tonight who are blind or who cannot access that information. My project was really to go to 4 countries that I chose. They happen to be Canada, US, Ireland, and the UK. And they were chosen because they have a very similar legal framework, both in terms of human rights and non-discrimination and building compliance and regulation. And I wanted to go to 4 countries that had a similar framework because I was looking at comparing how those countries dealt with issues, particularly in relation to existing buildings being upgraded and improved for access for people with a range of disability. So my project was really looking about how other countries ensure the best possible access and enforce good access for people with disability. And I've got on that screen one of my favorite cartoons, which is a group of Daleks, and I hope everybody knows who Daleks are, at the bottom of a flight of stairs saying, well, this certainly buggers up our plan to conquer the universe, which I've always loved as a example of questioning the issues of accessibility. Although someone did tell me the other day that the Daleks now actually can levitate, so we're not safe even from Daleks in the future. Highlights. Well, one of the highlights for me was that the scholarship was not just about me taking from other people. It was actually about being invited, as I started making contact with potential interviewees and organizations overseas, of people saying, well, look, we'd welcome you here. We'd love to spend some time with you, but we'd like you to actually do some presentations for us as well. So for me, it was, one of the highlights was being invited and being able to put time aside to be able to actually deliver some workshops and some information and some training. So it was like a win-win, you know. I was getting a lot from them. I opened up the opportunity for them to draw on my experiences and the experiences I know about here in Australia. So that was a really important giving and taking part of the project, part of my work. Another highlight was just how well respected the Churchill Fellowship is. The credibility of the trust, I found, really opened doors, and people were willing to offer time and their experience. They probably have people expecting them to give all the time, but once I explained the Churchill Fellowship and its aims and its history, there was a great willingness to open up those doors. And so the credibility of the trust was really important and important learning for me. Obviously, to be able to spend time with people, like-minded people who are advocates and working on accessibility issues was just wonderful. The common stories, the common frustrations, the common experiences were reinforcing and in some ways depressing, but also in some ways uplifting. And just as a sideline, I spent a year in Canada on exchange from the Australian Human Rights Commission to the Canadian Human Rights Commission, and discovered one of the most beautiful but disgusting lunchtime indulgences, which is a lunch called poutine. And there's a picture here on my slide of a bowl of poutine, which is hot chips smothered in cheese curds with gravy on top. And there were like pop-up vans everywhere on the streets of Ottawa in the freezing cold, and there was nothing nicer than going out in a -10 degrees and getting a bowl of poutine for your lunch. So that was certainly a highlight. Surprises. What the surprises were, I suppose, that while every one of the 4 countries I visited had some unique strategies and some really interesting triggers within the accessibility of buildings regulatory regimes, none of them had a system which shone, particularly in terms of enforceability. And it was a bit of a surprise to me that here in Australia, where we've got a complex but interestingly complete mechanism for ensuring the accessibility requirements under discrimination law are implemented under building law, we've got a pretty good enforceability system here compared to the rest of the world. So that was a little surprising that no one had got better than us in that space. And the other surprising thing, the other side of the coin there, was that other countries had much more investment in addressing systemic issues than we do in Australia. In America, we have the Access Board. In Ireland, we had the Centre for Universal Access. And in Canada and the UK, there were similar systems. So that was distressing and surprising. One of the wonderful things about Churchill Foundation and the scholarships is obviously the opportunity to pass things on. And for me, I was able to pass on in a number of ways, and I still pass on in a number of ways, which is lovely, lovely part of the program. One is that I happen to be member of 2 national task forces, one of which deals with reviewing the accessible building standards, and the other is the accessible transport standards. And I was able to bring all of the information that I got from overseas to those 2 task forces. Bit of frustration that I had to and have to continually knock on the door rather than have those task forces ask me for that information. One of the best areas is that I've been able to advise disability rights advocacy groups on strategies for change based on an understanding of what's going on internationally, and also assist organizations, government, non-government, businesses, to actually make connections with the people who I made connections with, to provide them with advice and information and experiences on the work and strategies that they do. And finally, doing this gave me an opportunity to bring to all of my work. I work professionally as an access consultant. I was able to bring to my work a comparative analysis of how things occur overseas, which really adds value to my personal work. The best thing about being a fellow, well, drawing on the experience gives depth to the work that I do. I'm able to say, well, in Canada, they do it this way, and this seems to work effectively, even though the technical tick box compliance mechanisms here are different. Giving back to people, I've had conversations with quite a lot of people who are making applications to fellowships, and I really enjoy that. It's really good to be able to talk to people and draw on their excitement and passion, and give some advice and tips on how I find it. And most importantly, me and my TED are able to wear our medals at the parties that we go to. And I've got a picture of my teddy bear, my very ancient teddy bear, with the Churchill Fellow medal pinned to their chest. Preparation. Things are getting a bit late, but talk to other fellows, talk to us, search the database, find people who have done something similar, get in touch with them and talk to them about how they went about preparing. Try and establish a good relationship with the local secretary of the fellowship or similar. I had great support and great, not inappropriate support from the local secretary here in Tasmania. She was very enthusiastic and helped me to really think through how I made my application fit within those 523 characters, which is a really hard thing for people who are pretty verbose. And finally, to think of curly questions like, what do you think of Churchill's legacy? Which is a question that was asked of me. I'm sure Churchill and I would have not shared the same politics, but I was able to really answer that in a genuine way about his sense of community and contribution to community. So curly questions like that. And finally, the other curly question I noticed there was, why can't you do this by Google search or email? And it was interesting to hear Adam say that one of the changes that have been made now is that it's possible to actually make a legitimate application which uses online stuff much more. But certainly when I applied, that was a question that I had. So think about curly questions that you might be asked for. So Adam, thank you. That's my presentation. So
excellent. Thanks, Michael. It's fantastic, and might just get you to stop sharing your screen so people can see you. And Helen, feel free to turn your camera back on. So look, we've got a couple of questions. Oh, Kate, a good question. How many applications do we receive each year? I did omit to mention that. So I'd say, like, pre-COVID, I would have said, between 1,000 and 1,100 applications. So we award, over 100. We're aiming for about 110 or 112 this year. Will we get 1,000 to 1,100 applications? Good question. I don't know. COVID's kind of thrown everything around a bit, hasn't it? So, I think we've already got between 11 and 1,200 applications started, but I'll tell you a really sad story. Normally we get sort of between 1,800 and 2,000 applications started, but that's sort of 1,000 to 1,100 submitted, which means a lot of people start and then don't submit. And we have surveyed people to find out what went wrong. And, you know, quite often I think they just lose their nerve and think, oh, no, I'm not good enough. So don't be that person. You know, you are good enough, potentially. Back yourself and put it in. Next, there is a question that Jeremy has asked Michael. And before I get to that, I just wanted to mention, look, if you go to our website, you can search for all the reports and fellows. You can search by state, you can search by name, you can keyword search for the topics, and you can put a request in directly through the website to connect with a fellow. And as Michael said, which is a good point, you know, reach out to other Churchill Fellows. You'll see on the homepage of our website down the bottom a map of Australia, and there's a link there to the Alumni Association in each state and territory. They're staffed up by volunteers who are all Churchill Fellows, and they're always happy to talk to you about your application and give you some advice and hints as well. So please avail yourself of that. But Michael, Jeremy's interested in how you shared your results on your return. So would you like to maybe answer that one?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And Jeremy, sorry I haven't connected with you on LinkedIn. I'm a bit of a Luddite. We must find a way of connecting because I understand you're in Tassie. Look, how did I share it? Well, firstly, obviously, the report was a sort of most important product, and I should add, and I think Helen added, you really got to make sure you've given yourself time to prepare the report. Do as much notes and as much collection of your ideas while you're overseas as possible. I'm lucky enough in that I have been over a long time well established with professional organisations like the Institute, the Australian Association for Access Consultants, and Building Surveyors Australia, and the Australian architectural world. So I actually put my report out through all of those connections and attended pre-COVID quite a number of conferences where I was talking about building access, but also referred to my report and my experiences out there, and obviously provided the report to everybody who was a member of these national task forces. So it was really about using networks that I had, and I suppose I should add also that the interviewers, the panels are interested to know what networks you've got and what you will be able to connect to when you come back. And I think that's something to bear in mind in your applications. Wouldn't want to put you off, as Adam says, but the more you can say, look, I've got these networks. It might be community organizations, it might be anything. I've got these networks and I can feed back through them. Yeah.
I think that's
sorry. So Jeremy, I'm not quite sure. Adam, can you make sure that Jeremy is put in touch with me, or how can we do that?
Well, I can't make sure, but he sent you something on LinkedIn, so maybe go and log in there after this and have a look. Sorry. Otherwise, Jeremy, just reach out to the trust.
Yep. It's michael@equalitybuilding.com.au. There
you go. And look, a good point. You know, if you're asked at interview or you in your application, when it asks you how you're going to share your findings, my advice is not to say, oh, look, I'll get a journal article published. I mean, that $28,000 average cost of a fellowship, we could buy a few journal articles for that. So think a bit more broadly about what you're going to do with sharing your findings. That's my advice there. We've got a question about the difference between the cost and project fee request. I'm not quite sure there, so I'm just going to try my best to answer that. It's a bit difficult when you can't speak to people asking questions in this format. But first, in terms of the cost of the fellowship, we do all the costing. Don't spend a second trying to work out how much flights and accommodation and food are going to cost. We do all that. You just worry about where you want to go and how long you want to go for. In terms of your fees, you know, there might be a course. So we've got a fellow leaving next month to go to Italy to undertake a 4-week course on Italian patisserie. Sounds really fantastic, and that's what he does, right? He's going to come back and create a course for TAFE here on that, and that's quite expensive, but like that's the focus of his fellowship. So there might be a course that you want to do. a word of warning, conferences. We may fund a conference. Don't look at a Churchill Fellowship as an opportunity to attend a few conferences. It's bigger than that. So it's great if there happens to be a conference that you might be able to slot into your carefully thought out and researched visits to different people and organizations. But if you make it all about the conference, it's going to look like a junket. It's not going to look like a project. So don't look at it as an opportunity to just put in lots of requests for conferences. We might support them, but you're not going to get up probably more than one. I wouldn't sort of treat it as that. So that's my advice there. There may be some other fees you want to request. For example, you might go to a country where English is not the mainly spoken language, and you might want some fees to help with the translator, for example. So you could put something like that in as a fee request. So I think where there's something quite specific, that's what the fee request is for, but don't try and cost the actual fellowship. Another question is, would I be too old at 73 years of age? Well, I hope not. I hope when I'm 73 that I won't be too old to do a Churchill Fellowship, but I think it really, there is no upper limit on the age. And I guess by that, what we mean is if you've got the energy and the passion and the connections, and you've got a good argument to put forward about why the issue you want to undertake research on with the Churchill Fellowship is important, and you're the person to do it, well, go for it. I see no reason why you would be too old to do a fellowship. Another question is, how much should our itinerary be fixed at the point we submit our application, and could you change it? So I did cover that earlier, and you may have been late coming in. So effectively, you need to know clearly who you want to meet with, which country, which town, city, which organization, which person, and why. You don't need to have contacted them and sort of locked it in. I would say, though, if you're really ambitious with some of the places you want to meet, just make sure you have a sense that they do meet people. There might be some organizations say, we never let people come here. So, and COVID, of course, has potentially changed some attitudes around that. But you don't need to have them locked in by any means. You can make some slight changes to your itinerary once you've been awarded, but not major changes. Because of course things happen between the time you apply and when you leave in your fellowship, and you might need to alter some meetings and that sort of thing. So that is possible. Would it be possible to have the email address of Helen and Michael? Absolutely. So Michael did offer his up before. I think, probably the easiest way to do this is if you go to our website and look up Michael or Helen, there is a contact form. You just put your details in, that comes to us, or just email or call the office and say, look, I saw this presentation. I'd like to get in touch with Michael or Helen, and we'll pass your details on to them. So then they can choose. And of course, we do that for all fellows. We don't just give out their details. We'll put them in touch to make sure they're comfortable making contact. This next question is from a research scientist in medicine, wondering if there are quotas for particular fields. No, we don't have set quotas, no. I'm keeping an eye on applications coming in this year. We've got a great system that allows us to see the categories, and it's looking fairly evenly spread, although I would say pleasingly arts is up a little bit this year from previous years, and that's good to see. So we like to try and see a good spread across all of them. We don't have quotas. Like, there are years when medicine and health and medicine, for example, is always quite strong, and we get a lot of applicants there. The other thing I would note, particularly again with health and medicine as a category, we've got quite a lot of sponsored fellowships. So they're fellowships where someone's donated money and said, I want to see fellowships on research into Parkinson's or research into surgical nursing. So we've got quite a lot of sponsored fellowships on those fields. So there's probably more available on science and medicine topics, but absolutely no quotas. Michael Jeremy has kindly shared his details with you and everyone else if you want to make contact. And if you're an academic, is there a preference for senior professors over early mid-year? Well, no, look, not really. We get lots of academics applying, as you'd expect. They're good at applying for things and researching. I don't think we definitely don't have a preference. I think one thing we will look at, of course, is if you apply for a Churchill Fellowship and you've got this long laundry list of grants you've just received in the last 12 months, $6 million of this, $4 million of that, 500,000 of that, that might actually go against you in a sense if we've got other applicants that have not had those opportunities. So I think, just be mindful if you're highly successful and getting lots of funding to do your research, the question might be, well, why do you need a Churchill Fellowship? So, we really want to give Churchill Fellowships to people who might not otherwise get the opportunity to undertake their research or to use the fellowship to learn new things and new skills. So no, again, we don't have quotas or preferences in that regard. And I think on that note, it looks like one more question's come in. Oh, no, it's just a thank you. So again, I'd like to thank Helen and Michael very much for your presentations. I love hearing about what you've been up to and what all our fellows have been up to. Thanks to everyone who's attended and stayed on for this presentation. Look, if you're going to apply, good luck. Don't be shy. Have a go, and best wishes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.